You've probably seen that there was interviews on all the television stations, 4, 6, and 8, and WQPT, whatever channel it is in your area, broadcast a 30-minute interview last night, and it will be rebroadcast tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. In addition, the Argus and the Dispatch, the Leader, the Times, the Muscatine Journal have all had articles. The Times has had 3 separate articles. The Muscatine Journal had it on the front page on Thursday, and there's also been announcements and information on the radio. So it's been quite impressive. And this leads me to just one point that I wanted to make, and why Brother Greichen and Brother Kempler accepted our invitation to come and speak to you tonight. There are really 2 things that they want to strive to accomplish here. One is that there are a lot in the community now that will have heard the story of Jehovah's Witnesses in Nazi Germany. And they're liable to have questions. And so when you are in the ministry or at work or wherever you may be, they may ask those questions, or you may raise the issue and they may want to know more. And they want you to know the answers. As an example, why didn't Jehovah's Witnesses sign that paper? So they want to help you to be prepared. And this is not something that won't happen. I'll give you just a brief experience. One of the reporters spent 2.5 hours at a program and interviewing the brothers. And that night, they called about 10 o'clock. They called once and then hung up real quick, and they called again and asked a couple questions. I need some details about the report. But then it turned out they had actually turned in their article already. And so this is what the reporter said. She was amazed at the story, particularly the faith. This has to be true faith to withstand such pressure. She says, I have often thought Satan was the only explanation behind such evil, but people make fun of that idea. I would like to have more information on how we get such faith. And she even commented that she realized to say Heil Hitler, in her words, would be to blaspheme Jehovah. So you may come in contact with people who want to know more. And so they're going to prepare you. Secondly, it's to strengthen our own faith, trust in Jehovah, and integrity. At one of the schools, the students were asked to fill out a questionnaire about what they learned from the presentation. One of the witness children said this: after hearing this presentation, I decided that that's the question, am going to endeavor to be strong and to keep my faith. I am proud to be part of the group that stood out as different in the concentration camps. That's what we all want to do, right? So we're going to listen to them first, Brother Kempler. Brother Kempler was raised in Poland as a Jew and became one of Jehovah's Witnesses later. Then we'll hear from Brother Greichen, who was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in Germany. So Brother Kempler, first, please.
Thank you. Good evening. It's a real pleasure to see such a great crowd and to talk to you about things which are important to all of us. So what I'm going to do today or tonight is not just talk about my experiences in the concentration camp, which this will be a pretty sad story if I concentrated on that, but really is to bring a message of hope and determination to remain faithful to Jehovah and to survive the end of the system of things. And some of the experiences in the camp would be very useful, I think, for all of us, because they illustrate that there were some people who survived intact and will be a great example for us. So essentially what I'm going to talk about is just about concentration camp life. It will be somewhat abbreviated talk to make room for 2 speakers. But the questions that we want to raise: what happens to faith and trust in God in a concentration camp? That's an important question. Why is it the majority lost their faith and some came out stronger than they came in with? How is it that the minds of people who were in the camp went through extreme stress, and how this resulted in their future? So these are some of the questions we're going to consider, as much as they apply to us as well, because we are essentially in the same situation, that our faith and our trust in Jehovah has to be maintained in order to make it through Armageddon. Now, as it was mentioned, I am a Polish Jew. I was born in Poland, in Krakow, to a rather religious Jewish family. I won't go too much about this. The purpose of my describing what has happened to me in the concentration camp as a Jew is to provide a contrast with Jehovah's Witnesses who were in the same camp, and how they dealt with the situation and what happened to them, and what we can all learn from this contrast, which is very important and powerful information. Now, I won't go into detail. Some of you may be familiar with what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust, how 6 million died. But I'll just sum it up in a short discussion, because what I wanted to point out, that I was brought up as a pretty religious Jewish boy. I took my religion seriously. I have been brought up with the idea of learning about conscience, about love, about being a good neighbor, all the things that good parents would instill into Jewish children, or any children for that matter. And I went to Hebrew school. I learned quite a bit about Hebrew scriptures and so on. But, my faith at the age of 11 or so was pretty naive faith. I mean, the faith of a child. Let me give you an example. If I wanted something, I would pray to God, but the point was that I would translate my prayer from Polish to Hebrew, because I wasn't sure that God understood Polish. So it points out, I mean, this is real, because, but what can you expect from the mind of an 11-year-old? But it was at this age that the Nazis marched into Poland and began the attack on the Jews, an all-out attack trying to kill us, and essentially they have succeeded. So we did not understand why things were happening, especially not children. But you take the position of, we didn't do anything wrong to the Germans. Why would they hate us? Why would they want to destroy us? And they actually went into this, the worst possible way of trying to destroying people. I won't go into details. I mean, they're killing children by smashing their head against the wall, separation between parents and children. I mean, the things were so horrible to start with that it was very difficult to take, and it was crazy making. However, things got from bad to worse. Eventually I wound up in the concentration camp. But, the Jewish people, not understanding what the problem is, prayed a lot. We all prayed. But nothing changed. You could pray all you wanted to, and the situation did not change. This reminds us of the scripture in Job. If we turn to Job chapter 19 and verse 7. Job 19 and verse 7. He says, "Look, I keep crying out violence, but I get no answer. I keep crying for help, but there is no justice." So we felt exactly the same way. You could pray until you're blue in the face, and nothing has changed. There was violence all around us, and there is no justice. So now, Job, even though he was a faithful man, he called out to Jehovah in this way because she did not know why things were happening to him. That's important. He did not know why Jehovah did it to him, in effect. So he was crying for help and nothing happened. Well, we felt the same way. We were crying out to God. All we saw is death and violence. We felt exactly the same way as Job did. Now, to sum it up, I went through 6 concentration camps. I won't go into details, but it was the most horrible place to be. And I'm bringing this up to show the contrast between us, the Jews, and the many others in the camp, and later on Jehovah's Witnesses. We have gotten to the point, to the lowest state of humanity. In reality, we were no longer humans. We really were not humans. People have sunk so low that we would kill anybody for a piece of bread, including our relatives. By the end of the war, I was 60 pounds. You can imagine how skinny 60 pounds looks for I was 17 when the war ended. Indeed, if you shone a flashlight through my stomach, you could see the light coming out on the other side. We were almost ready to die by starvation. I was less than 24 hours away from death by starvation. But in reality, the bigger problem that most of us went through is a form of emotional death, because the conditions were so horrible. And I spent 3.5 years in the camp. So if you were in danger all the time, and you have no way of fighting it, you have no way of escaping it, and you can even go mad, because if you go mad, you die anyway. So the mind automatically steps in and shuts many feelings and emotions down. This was the only way that we could survive and handle this, and becoming purely an animal who focuses on one thing, on survival, and survival meant living one day at a time, 1 hour at a time. There was no tomorrow. There was just the idea of surviving right now and not worry about the next day. In our language, there was no tomorrow. So this is a sort of an emotional anesthesia. You get to the stage where you don't feel anything, you don't care about anything, you don't care about anybody else, you just care about surviving the immediate present and the future. So what has happened? In a time like this, there's no past, there's no future, there's nothing we can do. Love. It became, what kind of a word is love? Love in the camp did not exist. Compassion, you would kill and maim anybody to receive something that you needed, regardless of what happened to the other people. So the idea of conscience, like it never existed. Now, I bring this up. Well, first of all, let's put it this way. The question always was, where was God? We as Jewish people did not do anything wrong to anybody. Where was God? And there was no answer. So, if we turn back to Job 21 and verse 15, where Job was also in a desperate state, and he said in 21 verse 15, what does the Almighty amount to that we should serve Him? Who is He? Why should we serve Him? What purpose? And how do we benefit ourselves in that we have come in touch with Him? There was no benefit. You can play all you wanted to, and there was no difference in our conditions. So the idea was, as Job felt, give up on God. That's what Job's wife told him. He says, curse God and die. And that's how we felt. What was the purpose of obeying God or praying to Him? He didn't do a thing. He let us die in the most horrible way. So we understand how Job felt, because we felt the same way. Now, so this is sort of a mental state that all of us were in, and I want to bring up now the contrast, because this would have been a pretty miserable talk if this was the story that I had to tell you. And in effect, many Jewish survivors, when they tell their story, tell a story but is hopeless, and which has no purpose, and has no meaning, and they do not understand down to this day what's happened, and how God has abandoned them, and why He permitted them. It just doesn't make any sense. So I would have felt the same way, except for the extraordinary experience when I was in one of the camps, camp number 5, in a long list of 6 different camps. We were brought into the camp, part of the orientation process was to find out what's what, how do you get along in the schedules. Every day was in some way critical, and every one of the situations had to be considered very cautiously in order to extend our survival. Well, there was one barrack in a camp that was surrounded by barbed wire. Now, we have never seen this before, because normally a camp was surrounded by the electrical high voltage wire, so nobody would come close to it. But we never saw a barrack which was surrounded by its own barbed wire. So I thought this must be extremely dangerous people. Even in a camp, they have a barbed wire around it. What kind of people are they? Well, the old-timers in the camp told me that these are Jehovah's Witnesses, Bible students. I never heard of Jehovah's Witnesses. Who are they? And what's more, the barrack was occupied by Germans, Aryans. They were not even Jews. So this completely, my teenage mind at this point couldn't understand that. Who are Jehovah's Witnesses? And why Germans, who are part of Hitler's master race, what are they doing in a camp? And they are Bible students. What's going on? Well, they explained to me, the people in the camp, not the witnesses, that they, because of the belief in the Bible, they refused for one thing to serve in the German army. Because they said that killing is wrong. Now, regardless of what the situation, what the reason is, killing is wrong, so they wouldn't kill. And then the German greeting was, everybody had to raise their right hand and say, Heil Hitler. So this was a visible demonstration. It's not like mumbling good morning or something, but this was extending arms, Heil Hitler. Now, Heil Hitler really means salvation belongs to Hitler. The witnesses wouldn't stand for that. They didn't believe that salvation belongs to Hitler. And then, even in the camp, even all of us did military type work, something to do with the military, and the witnesses refused to participate in it. I never saw any form of resistance. Any resistance to Germans was a cause of immediate death, execution. And they survived in the camp without saying, I don't want to do it, and they were not killed. So the more mysteries were piling up. And the next thing was that we understood that they could go out free, actually go out free, by signing a piece of paper, a declaration, which said, we'll renounce our faith in Jehovah's Witnesses, we'll pledge loyalty to Adolf Hitler. No, this is a declaration that was always set before them, and all they had to do is sign their statement, put their signature on it, and walk out of the camp free. Now, and they wouldn't do it. And this was a total mystery. We couldn't understand this. This was the subject of conversation and subject of discussion, because we were saying, why don't they sign it? Are they nuts or something? What's wrong with them? I mean, if you sign something, you don't have to actually believe it. In other words, if you sign something, you just put your name on it, and then you walk out and believe in your heart and your mind whatever you want to believe. Nobody can read that. But they wouldn't do it. And we couldn't understand this. Why wouldn't they do it? We couldn't understand this at all, and it didn't become clearer until later on. But everybody admired them for this position. It was so difficult to imagine that anybody would believe like this. And you know why their barrack was surrounded by barbed wire? Because if they would allow them, like in the evening it was possible to walk from barrack to barrack, they were locked up, because if they went out to speak to anybody else, they would try to encourage them, bring them a message of comfort, or maybe share a piece of bread, or do something good. And what the Germans, the Nazis, were trying to do is just precisely the opposite. They are trying to destroy us, to break our spirits, to break our determination. And the witnesses would encourage people. This was too dangerous for them, so they locked them up. Now, there are stories like this which go without an end. One question is, for instance, if they were refused to do military work, why would they be kept alive? So we didn't know that at the time, but since that time there is found a booklet published by the Holocaust Museum in Washington about Jehovah's Witnesses. There are many wonderful statements made, not by the witnesses, by the historians, which really shows how witnesses could endure and why they could do these things. But according to this, SS Chief Heinrich Himmler, he was the head of SS, probably one of the most brutal and terrible people in Germany. He often used the fanatical faith, in quotes, of Jehovah's Witnesses as an example to his own SS troops. In his view, SS men had to have the same unshakable faith in a Nazi ideal and in Adolf Hitler that the witnesses had in Jehovah. Only when all SS men believed as fanatically in their own philosophy would Adolf Hitler's state be permanently secure. Can you imagine that? Himmler did not want to destroy the witnesses, even though in the beginning the first 2 years were terrible, and many died. But he didn't want to destroy them because he wanted to have them join his side, to join Hitler's side. Because he said, he admired the faith of Jehovah's Witnesses. Everybody admired them. He didn't love them, but he admired them. He says, if they only come to our side, then Hitler's 1,000-year reign would be true. So he didn't want to kill them. He wanted to bring them to his side, and this is the reason why he gave the declaration, and that's why he didn't kill them off, at least towards the end of the war. And this declaration, I often thought about this. This is a terrible thing to have, because most of us were never given a choice. We would have signed anything, but we never got anything to sign. But the brothers, the witnesses, any time things became difficult in their lives, and it was difficult every day, if they got discouraged and upset, they could simply ask for that piece of paper, sign it, and go free. So it was all the time, that terrible temptation. There was any tendency to say, I got to give up, I can't take it. They could have signed it. But they refused to do this, and therefore everybody admired them. And I was thinking too, these people are Germans. By that time I gave up believing God. And these witnesses had the name Jehovah's Witnesses, and I knew the name. Because this is, as far as I was concerned, was the name of the Jewish God. Even though the Jews were never allowed to pronounce it, it was the name of the God that we recognize. So I was thinking, how do these German Gentiles worship the God that I just abandoned? Can you imagine that? And then I remember that the Jews in the earlier days, Spanish acquisitions of the times of their attempts were made to convert them to Catholicism, many of them died, burned at the stake. And the expression that was used to describe these heroes was, in Hebrew, was called, they died al-Kiddush Hashem. And what this means, that they died for the sanctification of the name. The name Jehovah they were not allowed to pronounce. So I said, these people are dying and sacrificing their life for my God, whom I just gave up on. Can you imagine the confusion in my mind? But at the same time, the tremendous admiration. This was a form of spiritual resistance. I didn't see any resistance. But those who resisted were shot or hung or whatever, or their heads were cut off. And they offered a form of spiritual resistance in which, instead of fighting the enemy, they stood up to their principles, stood up for their God. It was an incredible thing. And many stories like this. And I can't spend too much time on it. But the point was that just being with them, we're not allowed to talk to them, just being around them in the same camp and knowing what they went through gave us a spiritual uplift. We were spiritually stronger. What I mean is this, we were living among such an animal. We were animals really, behaved like animals. The functionaries, even though they were prisoners, they were really animals. The Germans treated us worse than there was no sign of humanity anywhere. So we were saying, let's say we survive, even though the chances of surviving are pretty small. But let's say we survived, what kind of world would we go into? More animals? What kind of life would it be? So having exposure to people who maintain such high standards of humanity, we say, maybe the world is not all gone. Maybe it's worthwhile surviving because there are people like Jehovah's Witnesses who make the living worthwhile. So this was a very powerful uplift. They're saying it's worthwhile to survive. So that was gave us another intent to keep going. Well, so this was very wonderful. And there are many, many stories from all the camps. Roughly there were only 12,000 witnesses in all of the camps, out of millions who were held in the camps. And yet in some camps there were only a few. But it was throughout the whole system, all the thousands of camps, the few witnesses always made such a mark that everybody admired them. And even there are stories, you may have read in some yearbooks, that some of the Nazi guards who watched over the camp became Jehovah's Witnesses themselves, and then they were thrown into the camp right along with them. The power of people who stand up for what they believe is tremendous. As we sank lower and lower into animal state, by contrast, they were elevated higher and higher as something which was beyond belief. Anyway, this didn't do much for us. The Jewish people who were broken, we have no hope. And then really there's a scripture which sort of describes how we felt in Psalm 44:22. Psalm 44:22. And it says, "But for your sake we have been killed all day long. We have been accounted as sheep for slaughtering." So this is how we felt. That's what happens to us as Jews. But now, this scripture has also been used someplace else. If we turn to Romans chapter 8 and verse 36, Romans 8:36, just as it is written, "For your sake we are being put to death all day long. We have been accounted as sheep for slaughtering." The very same words used by Paul and addressing them to Christians. So what attitude should the Jews have then? Because people who were put to death all day long and accounted as sheep for slaughtering, they must be broken and defeated. This would be normal because this is how we felt, broken and defeated. But look what he says in the next verse 37. To the contrary, in all these things we are coming off completely victorious. You see these words? Through all these things we are coming off completely victorious through him that loved us. Now this doesn't make sense normally. How can you be broken and slaughter the sheep at the same time coming off completely victorious? And this is really the thing we want to understand, because what I applied to the Jews, and it was really true for us, had a completely different meaning for the Christians. It's a powerful question, powerful words in here, because the brothers indeed could not be broken or defeated. They came off victorious. Let's look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4, which is some more explanations on the subject. 2 Corinthians 4:7. He says, however, we have this treasure in earthen vessels. Earthen vessels, human beings. What kind of treasure do we have? That the power beyond what is normal may be God's and not that of ourselves. So this is part of the answer. The power to survive and to keep going and to remain faithful and to remain human, this is power beyond what is normal. The millions of others couldn't take it, but the witnesses in the camp could do it. Why? Because the power came from God and not from themselves. And this is the key answer. So what happens in the camp? Did God relieve them of the precious? Let's continue in verse 8. He says, we are pressed in every way, but not cramped beyond movement. We are perplexed, but not absolutely with no way out. We are persecuted, but not left in the lurch. We are thrown down, but not destroyed. So what Paul is saying, that under these conditions we are pressed, we are cramped, we are perplexed, we are persecuted, but in all these things, never beyond the point of no relief. So that even though all of these things were happening to them, the Christians, early Christians, it may very well help for us. God is not going to relieve us of these things. It says go free and all that, but He will let us find a way out so we're never destroyed, even though we may be cramped and all the things He speaks about. And for instance, in verse 16, it says, therefore, we do not give up, but if the man we are outside is wasting away, certainly the man we are inside is being renewed from day to day. Now, Paul didn't speak here about Christians in the concentration camps, but the words fit so well. For instance, we do not give up. That's the one factor. We do not give up. Even if the man we are outside is wasting away. They suffered from starvations and wasted away the same way as most of us. So even though the man that they were outside was wasting away like the rest of the prisoners in the concentration camp, certainly the man we are inside is being renewed from day to day. Most of the others have given up. We're wasting outside, we're wasted inside, and just going down and down and down, more inhumane and more animal-like. But these brothers were renewed from day to day. Regardless of what happened on the outside, it's the inside that counts. The inside that kept them faithful, that kept them going, because they were doing it for Jehovah, not for themselves. This was the issue. They were doing it out of loyalty for Jehovah, and Jehovah helped them to renew them from day to day. So this is entirely different, from the Jewish people. We were really destroyed. I mean, the damage that's been done, especially to people in my age, was really horrible, and we suffer all kinds of the situations down to this day that are very harmful and that have done a lot of damage. However, in the past 5 years or so, I have met many of Jehovah's Witness survivors who were in the concentration camps, like me, but somehow they survived. And they survived in a way that I couldn't believe. He says, are you in the same place? You're talking about the same thing? I couldn't understand it. I mean, there was damage done to many of them, but the damage didn't last as long. It was never as extensive, even though they were in a concentration camp maybe for 12 or 13 years. So what has happened, they came out full of joy, many of them, and they were tested. They were tested under the most extreme conditions, and therefore they came out stronger than they were before. And then, this was idea of humanity in a phase of torture and death. There were women who were in the concentration camps. There were children who were taken away from their mother. I couldn't understand that. And it sort of bothered me, even though I was already in the truth. I questioned some of their brothers, and then they told me stories which I didn't relate to. And then a watch story came out, and I remember it says, happy are they for having suffered. So I said, this is out of their minds. What do they mean? How can you be happy for having suffered? I never could understand what this means. And then there's one scripture that really helped me and I wanted to share with you. It's Philippians chapter 4. And I think this scripture answered many of my questions, because I was so damaged I couldn't understand people who were in the same camp that were not damaged. How is it possible? Philippians chapter 4 verse 7. And he says here, Paul does, and the peace of God that excels all thought will guard your heart and your mental powers. And let's think about it for a minute. The peace of God. We were trying to find peace by running away from ourselves, from our feelings, from our emotions, and became emotionally dead, anesthetized, and these kind of feelings don't come back. But here, the peace of God that excels all thought, one translation says beyond human understanding, is this kind of a peace, which is beyond human understanding, will guard your heart and your mental powers. So can you imagine if Jehovah himself, in a way which we cannot understand, guards our hearts and our mental powers, then what better hands can we be in? Our mind cannot do this, so Jehovah will do. So this is the reason why the brothers came out of the camp feeling stronger than before and encouraged that they could withstand persecution and making such strange statement like saying, happy are those for having suffered, which is only possible to understand if you look at this from Jehovah's point of view. Well, let me sort of finish in a few minutes. The point is that we also are preparing for persecution in the future. This is the end of the last days, and the things are going to be difficult. How do we prepare? Now, there's one thing that we know. We don't have to go through any extraordinary heroic measures. We have to do this or that. Really, we are prepared in one way, and that is by, keep praying, attend meetings, read the Bible. All of the things that we told every day, these are the things that truly prepare us for the future. We don't have to do anything else except listen to our instructions. But at the same time, we have to be firm and determined, as the song brought out, because the preparation means for persecution is similar. For instance, let's take an example of blood transfusions. None of us would take blood transfusions, I'm sure. And when a question came up of having to have blood, we would say no. We are prepared. We have thought about it, we have heard about it, so we would absolutely refuse to take blood, and we are prepared for it. And the same applies in here, because we have to prepare ourselves for what comes ahead and set our minds that we're going to remain faithful and not waver in any way beforehand. You cannot do it afterwards.
Maybe some of you, brothers and sisters, are already familiar with what we are doing right here during this past week and the next week, namely participating in what is called Stand Firm program. And the society has used this kind of program for the last at least 5 years. And we have been invited to many different places. In the beginning, we went to universities and tried to teach the teachers in order that the teachers finally can teach to the students at the university the subject of the Holocaust, now from Jehovah's Witnesses' perspective. So we have been invited, Brother Campbell and I, to many different universities, and the society has sent me even to Brazil and to Puerto Rico, to other places too. And in all these universities, that question always came up in the mind of not only the students, but also the teachers and the highly educated professors, namely what was mentioned in the introduction about the signing of the Declaration of Jehovah during the Nazi time in the concentration camp, what Jehovah's Witnesses had refused. It was a real puzzle in the mind of most of those highly educated people. Why did you not do that? And I think it's a good idea for all of us as witnesses going out in the service, and these questions can come up in the service, and it's good for us to know the answer and not say when people ask, well, why didn't you just plainly, simply sign the declaration and go home? Why did you not do that? And if we would have to say, well, I don't know, don't ask me. Why didn't they do that? I don't know. Well, we should be prepared and be ready to give a reasonable, logical answer. And there's a very simple answer to that. And we should learn that and be prepared in order to really be Jehovah's Witnesses, to represent Jehovah and take his side. Because most of those students and even the highly educated professors and teachers, they all said, if I would have been there, I would have signed any paper the Nazis would have set before me to sign, and got out of that place as fast as my feet possibly would carry me. So it was an unsolvable problem in their mind. So we had to give an answer to that. And basically, you know already the answer to that question. Maybe you say, no, I don't, but you do. There are two basic reasons for it, and you know these reasons too, because they're Bible-based principles. The first principle has to do with the educated, Bible-trained conscience. Just think about it. How can a Jehovah's Witness sign a paper that says, I renounce my faith in Jehovah God, in Jesus Christ, in the Bible, and give up the preaching of the good news, and if other brothers would visit me again, I hand them over to the Gestapo, and from then on, join and support the Nazis and the Gestapo. Well, how can you do that? A Bible-trained conscience cannot do that. Even so, a fellow in Brazil, he told me the bullshit, oh yes, I can. Well, we should not forget, there are too many people today in the world who don't have a conscience. They have no scruples. They can commit any crime, a horrible crime, and have absolutely no remorse. But do we, as Jehovah's Witnesses, want to be and become these kind of people? But the answer is simply no. We can't. There's no way that we can do that and keep a clean conscience. How can anybody sign that paper and still have a clean conscience before himself before his family, and especially before Jehovah God. A Bible-trained conscience cannot do that. It's as simple as that. And the brothers proved that a Bible-educated conscience is different as what people consider a conscience, but is not trained, but is not educated on God's principles. Well, there is one answer, and it's a simple answer, isn't it? All of you will agree. Oh, I knew that already. No. And there's another answer, just as simple and uncomplicated. And that has to do with just plain, simple honesty. You know, how can we say it is honest? Even the SS told the brothers in the concentration camp, sign that lousy paper and go home. You know, and then you can believe and do what you want to. But is that really true? How can a person be just honest? By signing a paper with certain stipulations to do or not to do, or to promise to do or not to do certain stipulations, certain things, and then not even think on complying with the signed stipulations. Is that not outright dishonest? And unfortunately, that happens too often in political circles today around the whole world. And how do most of the people feel about that? People are fed up with that. Well, the brothers did not want to become people like those, because the Nazis not only helped, but educated people to become like that, dishonest and unscrupulous, like most of the people. But the brothers did not want to become like that, as the rest of the people. That is the way this world is dominated, run, guided, instructed, and people practice that. That are the devil's injustices and dishonesties, where the brothers didn't want to make themselves a friend of the devil, so to say, by copying the devil's dishonesty and trickery. Well, if we understand these simple, basic Bible principles, we will know, if the subject comes up, how to give an answer. And most of the people will say, have never thought on that. And I agree, you're right. And you have an answer, a real answer, but makes sense to most honest-hearted people. You know, not all people are like that fellow in Brazil. Oh, yes, I can. Well, these kind of things we should understand. And then we are prepared to be witnesses for Jehovah, to stand up for Jehovah's side in the big issue of universal sovereignty. The devil, what was just touched on by Brother Kempler, has made the accusation that any person and every person, no matter intelligent creature, will give up his worship toward his God Jehovah. And we finally cave in, and we see in Job's case, he even accused you have bribed him. No wonder he serves you. But nobody loves God, and nobody loves the truth. Just push him under pressure hard enough, and he will collapse, and he will curse you straight in your face. And that is why Jehovah has permitted sufferings, even of his own people. And we know that Jehovah didn't even spare his own son, Jesus. He had to prove his loyalty, his heartfelt devotion to his God Jehovah, his Father. And we see he set the right example for all of us to follow. So he gained God's favor. God did not forget him. And we know he gave him a great reward. He put him in an elevated place as nobody else except Jehovah God. What a wonderful reward Jehovah got. And that is what made Jehovah's Witnesses different in the concentration camp, what no other inmate could understand why Jehovah's Witnesses are so from their standpoint or viewpoint, I was crazy to stay here when you can go home. Get going, get out here out of that place. But Jehovah's Witnesses believe in a resurrection. So, no matter what, alive or dead, that's not the issue. We believe in the resurrection and everlasting life and a reward from Jehovah God for loyalty and faithfulness even unto death. And nobody, absolutely nobody, no devil and no henchman of the devil can take that reward from Jehovah away from his servants. That means from us. It's as simple as that. But do we not only say, oh yes, I believe that too, but here is what we have to show by action that we really trust Jehovah God. He will get us out. And I think it might be a good idea to relate a couple of experiences which help us to see that Jehovah God is not blind to injustices. He does not turn a blind eye to all the happenings in the world. He is interested in his people. That means in all of you and me too. He is interested. It's not like most of the people say, well, why does God permit that? Either he doesn't exist, or if he really exists, you come set out already, well, then he doesn't care about us suffering here. He's so far, who knows, up there in the heavens. And he doesn't have to suffer. He has a nice life, enjoyable, and so he couldn't care less what humans have to suffer. And so what's the result? Then they lose their faith and trust. And boy, isn't that true? Most people have, if they had so much faith, but that little bit is also gone now. And then people, but it's a result, or the response of most of the people, then they get bitter against God. And haven't you heard that yourself in the service, that people always come with that accusation, if there is a God, why doesn't he do something? But Jehovah has done something already. He has already installed a government, a righteous government in the heavens, and has given us, all of us, the rest of us, the hope for everlasting life in a new righteous order of things to restore a paradise here on the earth. So Jehovah God has done something like, but on his part already for all of us. But we have to hold on. And many times experiences of brothers and sisters who had to endure this kind of unjust persecution and have seen the hand of protection of Jehovah upon his people in order to keep him, for instance, supplied with spiritual food. To listen to these kind of experiences will definitely strengthen our faith and our trust in Jehovah God. Let me just relate a couple of those. When the Nazi system had disappeared at the end of the Second World War, then where I lived and grew up was occupied by the Russians. Germany was divided in 4 parts, and the Americans occupied one part, the British and the French, and the Russians too. Where I lived, it was what became finally East Germany. You will remember that. So in East Germany, right after the war, the Russians said, you can believe what you want to and do what you want to. We don't care, because they knew that Jehovah's Witness was the only religion that did not support the Nazi and that wicked system. They knew that. They were in a concentration camp. That's why I said, we couldn't care less. You can do and believe what you want to. But the point was, there were too many people who listened to Jehovah's Witnesses in their message. Because the communist system, that was a big disappointment for the people also. They were looking for something better. And so the people came in the truth. Boy, it was amazing and very enjoyable to work in East Germany. And so we grew by leaps and bounds. And then finally they said, hey, wait a minute, this gets out of hand. We have to stop that. There are too many people who listen to what they consider foolishness to believe in God, because they wanted the people to become atheists and not believe in God. So finally in 1950, they put a ban on Jehovah's Witnesses again and picked up all the brothers, especially in the beginning, and threw them in the penitentiary. But during that time, it was very difficult to get some literature. So the only place where the brothers could get literature was to go to Berlin and to get some literature and put them maybe in a bag or whatever and take them back. And then over there, they many times multiplied the individual magazines, especially, that the brothers in different congregations and cities had some spiritual food. But the problem was one had to go to Berlin. At that time, the wall didn't exist yet. So you had to get there. But there was no way for anybody to just go to the railroad station and buy a ticket to Berlin. You know, you was immediately under suspicion. Why do you want to go to Berlin? You want to go and join the capitalists on the other side. You know, I mean, they stopped it. And all the roads leading into Berlin were all blocked and checkpoints from police. So you couldn't just say, okay, I jump in a car on a motorcycle and drive to Berlin and come back. There was no way to do that. The police checked everybody in and out. So the only way to go there was with a bicycle. And not only with a bicycle, you couldn't go on the highways because you were stopped too. Anybody, even walking in and out, you were checked. So it had to be somebody who knew the highways and the byways and dodge the checkpoints. Well, the question was, who's going to go? Just think on yourself, would you go? Would you trust Jehovah and His protection? A good question, isn't it? Well, one brother, he knew the highways and the byways around Berlin, got on his bicycle one day and drove to Berlin in order to get some new magazines. Well, it went all good. It was a beautiful spring day, and it was a holiday. And that's why he was thinking that's the best day, because some of the policemen might be on furlough going home to his family or to his parents or maybe go to a show or to a football game, but who knows. So he said that would be a good day because there are not too many out on the checkpoints. So he went to Berlin and got himself a nice package of magazines, put it on the back of his bicycle, and here he went up back home, avoiding the checkpoints. But as we know, things go good for a long time, but earlier or later, it's going to happen. It's bound to happen. We know that. The law of average will catch everybody. And so here he drove around one corner, and boy, here he was, right in the middle of the street, the policeman. And so he stopped him. And he didn't beat around the bush. He asked him immediately, what do you have in the package? Because that's why he was standing there, to check. Well, now, just put yourself in the brother's shoes. What would you have said? What answer would you have given him? Now, don't forget the point. It's not just the policeman. Don't forget, it's the devil behind whom we have to fight. We don't fight Nazis or communists or what. Our fight is a spiritual fight against the powers in the heavenly places, the devil and their demons. They are behind it, and they are just cooks. They are just puppets they use in order to create problems and difficulties for us as Jehovah's servants. So nobody really knows what went in the mind, was in the mind of that policeman. But as I mentioned, it was a nice, beautiful spring day, and maybe he was already angry and fed up that he had to stand in the street and check everybody if maybe they have a rotten egg in the pocket or not. So, and all his friends were already home, and maybe he wanted to see his girlfriend or go to a football game, or who knows. It doesn't matter really. So when he asked the brother that question, what do you have in that package? The brother, with a big smile on his face, said, watchtowers. That policeman looked at him with a real mad face and said, hey man, I'm not in the mood, not today, for dumb jokes. And he said, beat it. Now, why do I tell you that experience? First of all, we should never forget that there is no ever a situation where for Jehovah is not a way out. It just doesn't exist. For Jehovah, there's always a way out. But the devil likes that, to push you in the corner where there is obviously no way out. Can't back up, you cannot go to the right, and you cannot go to the left. There's no way to face it. But that policeman, why did he not believe that? And he thought it was a joke. Because he knew, or was convinced, if there would be watchtowers in, nobody would say there were watchtowers in. It had to be a joke. And he was not in the mood, not in that day, for jokes. But here's a point that we should learn. We should never, ever in our life resort to lies. Because who's behind lies? Not Jehovah God. He's a God of truth. And we are His witnesses and tell the truth. You know, if you tell the truth being sad, what for? Why not be rejoicing and smile and tell the truth? We have a reason to worship Jehovah, who's a happy God. But worldly people would never do that. Never. Only Jehovah's Witness would do something like that. Because they're honest. They tell the truth. They are not devious and not crooked and dishonest. The whole world is dishonest under the devil's rule. But here's the point what we should never forget. If the brother would have used to hide or get around the facts and have lied, what would have been the result? The result would have been that he would have stepped out from God's powerful protective hand and thought, I have to find my own way out here with some lies. But we should not forget that the devil also knows what is true. And the devil would see to it that the truth would come out, and then they would say, but now you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and you're just as big fat liar as everybody else. Aren't you ashamed? That's what the devil wants us to do, to copy him. And so the devil got a real slap in his face because the brother did not do it. But the devil said, oh yes, everybody is a liar. I'm not the only liar. Everybody is a liar. You and you and you and I too. And that is just not true. We can prove that Jehovah God has servants here on this earth, even so imperfect, yes, but they are honest. They are devoted to the truth and stick to the truth no matter what is the outcome. The outcome is not the issue. You know, I mean, it could have turned out the other way around too, and he says, okay, in a penitentiary. But we stand, it's not a crime to worship Jehovah God, it is the obligation of all humans here on this earth to worship Jehovah God and stand up for his principles. And we should never lose sight of that important aspect in our life. And prove the devil a liar, but not everybody is like the devil says, one like himself. No, there are people in the world, they are dedicated, and they love Jehovah God from their whole heart and their whole mind and their whole strength and their whole soul, and not only love Jehovah God and the truth, but also their neighbor, as themselves. And that is what the brothers did, to stand up and to help the brothers and the sisters in the eastern part of Germany to get the spiritual food. And let me just briefly mention another one to show it is Jehovah's hand of protection we have to rely. Because in a situation like that, what can you do? Resort to lies, that's what the devil wants you to do. That's why he corners you. But if you trust Jehovah God, he will provide whatever is needed. Then we give you another experience about not just brothers. Sisters are very courageous too, believe it. Very courageous. When the communists in East Germany picked us up, there was the same system with the Nazis. The Nazis called it Gestapo and the communists called it Stasi. Well, when the interrogation was over, you might have read my life story in the Watchtower. Then they brought us back for the Germans to have a court case and condemn us. Well, when I came back, and a sister, where I was a special pioneer in my last assignment before they picked me up, she tried to visit me. And she got permission to visit me. So what did she do? She took a magazine, folded, by the way, these magazines that went to East Germany were printed on very fine, how do they call it, onion skin, but the Bible is printed, it didn't take very much space, So she folded the Watchtower up in just a tiny little square and put it in a handkerchief. And when we embraced, then she put that handkerchief in my hand. And I put it in my pocket, and everything went fine. Just like that. Well, it seemed it was just like that. But it wasn't. Because the fellow who was sitting there and watched us didn't see anything. Nothing funny or something that happened. But it seemed there was another guy who was on the next table, and he saw something white has changed hands. He didn't see what it was, but he saw something white has changed one hand to the other. So when the guard brought me back to my cell, there were 4 other brothers in the cell too with me at that time. When he brought me back, he left, and it was not 2 minutes, and they came back and ripped open the door, and there were about 2 or 3 policemen, and they came in, and immediately I was still standing there, right there at the door, in the entrance of the cell, and said, "What did she give you? What do you have in your pocket?" Well, what would she say? It's tough, isn't it? Because if I would have handed that over, that sister would stay right there. She would never have gone home. Not on that day. That's for sure. But here is, you can see how the devil puts you in the corner. Here you are. What are you going to do? You cannot say yes, and you cannot say no, because no, if you say didn't give me anything, it's a lie. And you cannot say yes either. So many times there are no answers, yes or no. It's just not so easy. So I didn't say anything. I just looked straight in his face, put my hand in my pocket, and pulled out a white handkerchief. I didn't say nothing, not one word, and they made big eyes. Oh, sure. Well, it's understandable. If a person meets a loved one under these kind of circumstances and conditions, it's normal and understandable for a normal human that he needs a handkerchief, doesn't he? Wouldn't you? Okay, there was the answer. I didn't say a word, but they took it as an answer. Closed the door and left. It is Jehovah what helps us to get out of these kind of conditions. So why do I try to relate these experiences? To help you trust in Jehovah God with your whole heart. And isn't that what Psalm 145? Well, Psalm 145, it puts it this way, when it says, verse 18 and 19, it says, Jehovah is near to all those calling upon him, to all those who call upon him in trueness or in truth. In other words, not with lies. And it goes on, verse 90, and the desire of those fearing him, he will perform. And their cry for help, he will hear, and he will save them. Yes, we need Jehovah's help, and the only thing what you can do under these conditions is what Nehemiah did, namely praying to Jehovah God for help. Because what do you stand? What can you do? You're trapped. But do you have that faith and trust in Jehovah God to get you out of that situation that the devil has tried to get you into? And I think that are things which are encouraging for all of us to strengthen our faith and our trust in Jehovah God, and never forget, for Jehovah God, there is never, ever a situation where he does not know the way out.